They said the jungle never gives back what it takes. When Clara arrived at the edge of her inheritance, a decaying cabin tangled in vines, she felt the air grow heavier, like the place itself was watching. The roof sagged, the windows clouded with age, yet inside, a single lamp glowed steadily, its cord buried in dust. Plates sat on the table, half-eaten meals preserved beneath a thin layer of mold. On the wall hung her uncle's photograph, his eyes scratched out, his smile frozen. Locals had warned her not to come, that some doors were never meant to be opened. But something in the stillness whispered her name, pulling her deeper into the shadows of that cabin. What was her uncle protecting beneath those floorboards, and why did the jungle seem alive around her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara sat alone at her small kitchen table. The city murmured faintly beyond the window, sirens, engines, distant voices, all the usual reminders that life kept moving, whether or not she wanted to follow. Before her lay the envelope from the solicitor, untouched since morning. Her fingers traced the edge of the seal. It was stiff, layered with dust and wax. She hesitated for a long while before breaking it. Inside was a single folded page, the ink faint but careful. Clara, if you're reading this, then I am gone. I never expected you to come back, but the cabin is yours now. Keep it safe. What I began must not be forgotten. The jungle remembers what we do not. Uncle Samuel, she read it twice, then again, slower, letting each word sink through the quiet. It felt less like an inheritance and more like an unfinished sentence. Her uncle had been eccentric, yes, but never careless with language. "The jungle remembers," she whispered, and the phrase seemed to hum in the room. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her memories of him were thin, letters once a year, visits that never came. He'd been the only person who spoke softly to her after her mother's death. He used to tell her stories about places where time didn't behave the same way. "The world keeps its own kind of memory," he'd said once, as they sat near a park pond, feeding pigeons. "You just have to know where to listen." That was decades ago. She had been a child who believed everything, and now she was a woman who believed in nothing she couldn't hold. The next morning, Clara packed a small bag. It wasn't that she wanted to go. It was that not going would leave her restless. The solicitor had given her directions, handwritten with a single note. "The road ends before the river. After that you'll need to walk." She borrowed a friend's truck. The interior smelled faintly of gasoline and pine. As she turned on the ignition, a small rattle came from the glove compartment. When she opened it, an unmarked envelope slid out. Inside was a single rusted key, its teeth sharp, the handle etched with a tree whose roots spiraled like veins of lightning. Her pulse quickened. It had to be from him. There was no note this time, only the faint scent of soil and metal, like it had been buried for years. She turned it over in her hand. The engraving was beautiful, almost deliberate, roots branching into an intricate pattern. For a moment she considered turning back, selling the land, letting someone else handle whatever waited there. But curiosity, quiet and insistent, overruled logic. She placed the key in her coat pocket and started driving toward the edge of the city. As the buildings thinned and the trees thickened, the air changed. The paved roads narrowed into gravel paths, then into dirt. The hum of the city faded until all that remained was the sound of tires crunching stone. The directions led her through old farmland and forgotten villages. Locals stared as she passed, their faces unreadable. When she stopped for gas, an old man at the counter noticed the letter on her dashboard. "You're heading toward Bolondo?" he asked. Clara nodded. "My uncle's cabin, Samuel Delane." The man's expression tightened. "He was a good man once. Should have stayed in town." "What do you mean?" "Strange lights. No one's been out there in years. Some say the jungle swallowed the place. Others say it's still breathing." She tried to smile it off. "Cabins don't breathe." The man didn't answer. He simply handed back her change and whispered, "Then you'd better hope that one doesn't." Back on the road, Clara rolled down the window. Warm air brushed against her face, carrying the smell of wet leaves and something sweet, almost floral, but faintly decayed. The jungle loomed closer now, a green wall rising from the earth. Her headlights caught a sign half buried in vines. Decaying property, private. The letters were nearly gone, swallowed by moss. She parked and sat in silence for a while, the key in her hand again. What had her uncle meant? What had he begun that she was supposed to keep safe? As dusk bled into night, she stepped out and listened. The forest buzzed faintly, not with insects, but with a low vibration, something alive in the stillness. The letter's words echoed softly in her mind. The jungle remembers what we do not. She tightened her grip on the key. The air felt heavier now, almost expectant, as though the trees themselves were waiting. She whispered into the darkness. "Then remember me kindly." The jungle did not reply, but something rustled, deep within, like an unseen hand turning over the soil, preparing to answer in its own time. The road dissolved into mud by noon. Clara parked the truck where the tire tracks vanished into weeds, slinging her small pack over one shoulder. The path ahead was only a memory, roots and earth interwoven where a road once cut through. She hesitated, staring at the first archway of trees. The canopy beyond was dense, the light already dim, though the sun still hung high. She could almost feel the humidity from here, thick as breath. For the first time since leaving the city, she considered turning back. But that key in her pocket had weight, not just metal, something heavier, like a question that refused to die. She stepped forward. The jungle received her without ceremony. Leaves brushed her arms, damp and soft. The smell of moss and soil enveloped her, rich and ancient. The further she walked, the more the world behind her seemed to dissolve. Bird calls came and went in strange patterns, as if echoing conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Once she stopped to rest, but even standing still felt like trespass. The earth seemed to hum faintly beneath her boots. After an hour, she came to a bend where the path forked. To her left, the air was still. To her right, a faint breeze stirred the vines. She followed the breeze. That's when she noticed the satchel, tattered, half buried in leaves beside a fallen log. The leather was cracked, waterlogged. When she opened it, she found a compass inside, its casing green with rust. The needle trembled, twitching erratically, as if trying to find north and failing. She shook it once. The needle spun and stopped, not north, but toward the heart of the jungle. There was something written inside the lid. "Follow only when it pulls." She frowned. "When it pulls," she murmured aloud. A gust of wind shivered through the canopy, and she felt, briefly, an odd sensation. A soft tug beneath her ribs, as if something unseen aligned with her breath. She pocketed the compass and walked on. The jungle grew quieter as she advanced. No insects, no birds, no wind, just her own footsteps and the faint creak of the trees. Every so often, she thought she heard water, but it was never close, never far, like a stream that moved whenever she did. When the first shadow of the cabin appeared through the foliage, she didn't recognize it at first. It looked like the jungle had decided to reclaim a piece of itself. Walls and roof softened by moss and vine. She stepped closer, her breath catching. The cabin was smaller than she expected, yet somehow vast in presence. Its wooden beams slanted, roof caved slightly inward. Ferns grew through the porch floorboards. A single window reflected the forest back at her, dark and still. For a long time, she didn't move. It felt wrong to approach without asking permission, but the pull from the compass urged her forward, gentle yet insistent. The porch groaned beneath her weight. Every creak felt like a heartbeat. She reached for the door handle. It turned easily. Inside, the air was cool and stale, as if sealed for decades. Dust floated in thick ribbons of light that pierced through holes in the roof. Furniture lay covered in sheets, but beneath them were outlines of a once living home. A table, 2 chairs, a writing desk by the window. The smell was a blend of old rain and ash. She walked carefully, scanning the small room. On the desk sat a lantern, the same kind from her memory. Its glass was clean. That unsettled her more than the decay. Someone had tended it. Next to it, a half-empty mug of tea, molded but intact. Beside that, a photo frame face down. She turned it over, her uncle smiling faintly, an arm around a woman whose face had been scratched away. Her throat tightened. She set the frame down gently, unwilling to disturb it further. The floor creaked as she crossed toward a corner where roots had burst through the boards. The jungle had begun to swallow the cabin, curling its tendrils along walls and into the gaps between furniture. Yet despite the invasion, everything remained eerily preserved, like time had given up halfway through erasing it. She noticed a rug slightly raised near the far wall. Bending down, she peeled it back. Dust rose in a faint cloud, revealing the edge of a wooden hatch. The same tree emblem from the key was carved into its surface. She crouched beside it, pressing her palm against the symbol. The wood felt colder than the air. The compass in her pocket began to shake again, faint but constant. "Not yet," she whispered, stepping back. The air around her seemed to listen. Night was coming quickly. The forest outside darkened with unnerving speed, as if the sun were being swallowed whole. She lit a match from her pack and set it near the lantern. The flame caught instantly, too bright for old oil. The light flickered across the room, and something glimmered beneath a cabinet. She knelt and reached underneath, pulling out a small glass jar half filled with soil. Inside was a folded note wrapped in wax paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The writing was her uncle's again. "The key fits only what remembers you." Her breath hitched. What did that mean? She stared at the note, then at the hatch in the floor, then at the jungle pressing against the windows. For a moment the vines outside seemed to pulse faintly, like veins under skin. The night sounds began, strange calls, low and mournful, not quite animal. Clara stepped to the doorway, listening to the jungle's rhythm. The compass still trembled against her chest, pointing not north, but straight down, toward whatever waited beneath the cabin. In the darkness, she whispered softly to herself. "All right. Uncle, I'm listening." The wind answered with a sigh that rustled every leaf at once. The night pressed close around the cabin, thick with the jungle's restless breathing. Clara sat at the table, the lantern casting uneven light across the floorboards. The key and compass lay between her hands. Both seemed heavier now, as though aware of what waited beneath them. She could no longer ignore the hatch. Rain began outside, slow at first, then building into a steady roar. It muffled the distant calls of unseen creatures. The storm gave her courage. It felt as though the forest's attention had shifted elsewhere. She pulled the rug fully aside and knelt by the hatch. Her fingers traced the carved tree symbol once more. The grooves seemed deeper than before, the shape more alive. Clara took a breath, inserted the key, and turned. A soft click. The hatch lifted easily, releasing a puff of cool, stale air. The smell was of soil and cedar, earth that hadn't seen light in decades. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Lantern in hand, she stepped down. The steps creaked under her weight, but held. The air grew colder with each descent, the humidity fading into something stiller, heavier. At the bottom, the space opened into a low cellar lined with stone. Shelves filled with jars and boxes surrounded her, most labeled in her uncle's handwriting: "Seeds, North Plot. Medicinal roots. Do not disturb." At the center of the room stood a small table. Upon it, a wooden box no larger than her palm, its surface alive with roots that had grown into the wood, curling around the edges as if to protect it. She approached slowly, her lantern trembling slightly in her hand. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. She reached out and brushed away the dust. The roots were warm to the touch. A faint pulse vibrated beneath her fingertips, steady, rhythmic like a heartbeat. She drew back. "What are you?" she whispered. The compass in her pocket spun once, then stopped dead, its needle fixed toward the box. Something in her, instinct or memory, told her to lift it. When she did, she found the roots detached easily, almost willingly. Beneath, carved into the table, were 3 words: "Feed it light, She turned the box over. A seam ran along its middle, sealed with what looked like resin. She carried it up the stairs and placed it on the desk near the lantern. As the flame's glow touched it, the box quivered slightly, then began to hum. A low vibration, almost inaudible, but felt in the bones. The roots shimmered faintly, color bleeding through them like veins waking after sleep. Clara stepped back. The lid loosened. Inside lay a smooth seed the size of her thumb, glowing faintly amber. It pulsed once, twice, then stilled. She felt drawn to it, compelled. Her uncle's note from the jar echoed in her mind. The key fits only what remembers you. What could remember her? She had never seen this place before. Never known her uncle well enough to be part of its memory. Unless he'd meant something deeper. She held the seed in her palm. It was warm, not like fire, but like the slow burn of life. For a moment, she saw an image in her mind. Her uncle kneeling in this same cellar, whispering to the soil. Around him, vines twisted toward him like listeners. Then it was gone. The storm outside intensified, shaking the windows. The vines on the walls rustled, though there was no wind. The lantern flickered. The flame bent toward the seed. Clara placed it gently back in the box. The hum subsided, though she could still feel its pulse faintly through the table. She sat in the chair, staring at it for a long while, the sound of rain steady above her. Her uncle's life had been simple, or so everyone said. A reclusive man who grew herbs, wrote letters no one read, and left behind a cabin in the jungle. But this was something else. She rose, scanning the shelves again. One corner of the cellar held a trunk bound in metal. It bore a carved version of the same tree symbol, but older, worn down by time. Inside were notebooks, water-damaged but legible. The first page read, Year 23, the jungle speaks again. I think it knows what we buried. She turned another page. Sketches of vines wrapping around stones. Notes about resonance, memory, and seed consciousness. Then a phrase underlined 3 times. The root remembers what the blood forgets. Her pulse quickened. The words felt like a whisper from beyond time. She looked at the glowing seed once more, the faint light flickering like breath. When she touched it again, it pulsed harder, responding to her warmth. The ground trembled faintly beneath her boots, just once, like the jungle exhaling. A drop of water fell from the roof and hit the desk. The lantern flared and dimmed, then silence. Clara closed the box slowly, wrapping it in a piece of cloth she found nearby. She placed it beside her pack, unsure what to do next. But one thing was certain. The cabin wasn't just her uncle's. It belonged to something older, and whatever he'd started, it was waking up again. Outside, the rain eased. A single sound rose from the darkness beyond the window, a soft rustling, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Clara whispered into the stillness, "Uncle, what did you plant?" The jungle answered with silence that felt alive. The morning arrived pale and uncertain, a fog stretching low over the jungle floor. The storm had passed, but the world it left behind seemed hushed, as though holding its breath. Clara woke to the scent of damp wood and earth. Her uncle's cabin felt changed, the walls darker, the air heavier. The small box with the glowing seed sat wrapped on the table beside the cold lamp. She hadn't dared open it again through the night. She brewed instant coffee from an old tin she found in the cupboard. The taste was bitter, grounding. Her hands still trembled slightly as she unpacked her bag, searching for something, anything, to distract her from the unease that had rooted in her chest. When she opened the desk drawers to look for paper, her fingers brushed against something that rattled. She tugged, and a false panel slid loose. Behind it was a leather-bound notebook, its cover scarred and soft from years of use. S. Morrow was embossed faintly on the front. Her uncle's journal. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with erratic handwriting, notes scrawled over sketches, dates crossed out, and half-finished sentences that bled into one another. Some entries were neat, scientific. Others looked frantic, written in the dark. The roots communicate below the surface. Each one carries memory, encoded, passed on. The light seed reacted again tonight. It remembers Clara. How? She froze at her own name. The entry was dated 3 months before his death. Her pulse quickened. She read on. If she ever finds this, she must understand. The jungle is alive in a way we never defined. Not spiritual, organic. The line between consciousness and growth isn't separate here. It listens. Clara leaned back, heart pounding. The edges of the page were stained with something that looked like dried sap. She flipped forward to another passage. I've begun marking the resonance sites. Each one hums at night. The vines bloom where the ground is hollow. The first coordinates, 7°T south, 131°12 east, Belondo Creek West Bank. Beneath it was a rough map, hand-drawn, inaccurate but familiar. It showed the cabin, the surrounding stream, and a path leading deep into the trees. Clara traced the lines with her finger. At the map's edge was a small drawing of the same tree symbol she'd seen on the key, the hatch and the box. It wasn't a family mark. It was a warning. She closed the journal and stared out the window. The jungle shimmered in the morning heat, mist lifting in slow spirals. The world looked ordinary, peaceful even. But somewhere beyond those trees lay the coordinates her uncle left behind. The rational part of her mind told her to leave, to drive back to the village, hand the key to the authorities, and walk away. But the pull was stronger now. The same quiet gravity that had drawn her to open the hatch. She slipped the compass into her pocket and tucked the journal under her arm. As she stepped outside, the damp air hit her like breath. The jungle sounds rose, a chorus of insects dripping water, distant bird calls. Her boots sank slightly into the wet soil as she followed the faint trail her uncle's sketches had mapped. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. Even the birds seemed to hold back their songs. The trees grew taller, their trunks wider than she could wrap her arms around. Vines hung like curtains, some pulsing faintly under the light. At one point she stopped to check her compass. The needle spun again, then locked firmly in one direction, straight ahead. After an hour of walking, she reached a clearing. In the center, the ground had sunken slightly, and from that hollow rose an enormous tree, its roots sprawling like veins across the earth. It was the same shape as the one carved on the box. Clara knelt beside one of the roots. The soil around it shimmered faintly, flecks of amber embedded like tiny embers. When she touched it, warmth surged up her arm. She heard something faint, a whisper, not in her ears, but inside her mind. Remember. Clara stumbled back, clutching her wrist. The air thickened. The vines along the trunk rippled as though stirred by breath. She opened her uncle's journal again and flipped to a page marked with dried leaves. Beneath a drawing of the same tree were the words, Root Memory, the Living Archive. The sketch showed a hollow beneath the roots, labeled Chamber 1. She hesitated only a moment before digging where the ground dipped. Her fingers hit wood, a buried crate. She scraped the dirt away and pried it open. Inside were dozens of glass jars, each filled with murky fluid, and something preserved within. Fragments of vines, seeds, petals that pulsed faintly even now. Each jar bore a label with a name. June 1987, K. Alara. July 1991, M. Dean. August 2003, S. Morrow. Her uncle's own name was there among the others. She stared, breath catching in her throat. Were these plants grown from people? Or had people turned into plants? A low hum filled the air again, vibrating in her chest. The vines along the ground moved closer, inch by inch, as if reaching toward the open crate. Clara slammed the lid shut and stumbled backward, heart pounding. The whisper came again, softer this time. You were meant to return. She ran, branches whipping at her arms, roots catching her feet, until the cabin came back into view. She slammed the door behind her, gasping. The compass on the table spun wildly, then stopped, pointing not outward, but down. The seed's glow pulsed once inside the wrapped box. Clara sank to the floor, clutching the journal. Whatever her uncle had found in the jungle hadn't died with him. It was waiting. And now it remembered her. The rain returned that night, not the sudden kind but slow, deliberate, like the sky itself was whispering warnings through water. Clara sat by the window, wrapped in her uncle's old coat. The box still pulsed faintly on the table. The journal lay open beside it, pages marked by dirt and the press of her shaking hands. Sleep refused her. Every creak of the cabin felt alive, as though the wood itself was breathing. She moved to the bedroom to gather her thoughts, needing distance from the light and from what she'd seen buried beneath the roots. While shifting the bed to sweep away leaves blown in by the wind, her foot caught on a loose board. It lifted slightly with a dry crack. Beneath it lay dust, a broken pencil, and something that caught the faint gleam of her lantern. Glass. She reached in and drew out a pendant. Small, circular, sealed with brass edges. Inside the glass, something was coiled, a vine. Dry and fragile, but faintly glowing, as though a heartbeat pulsed within it. At the base, she could just make out the engraving, Witness. The word sank into her. Her uncle's notes spoke often about memory transference and root consciousness, but never about witnesses. Why hide this under the floor? She brought the pendant closer to the lamp. The faint pulse grew brighter. Her reflection shimmered against the glass, and for a moment she didn't see her own eyes. She saw his, her uncle's. Clara, a voice said softly, not from behind her but within the air itself. She froze. The voice wasn't entirely human, familiar yet distant, like an echo trapped in a well. She looked back at the glass. The glow inside began to swirl, casting faint shadows across the walls. The shapes seemed to form images, flickering scenes like ghosts trapped in amber. She saw her uncle standing outside this same cabin, a lantern in hand, mud smeared on his clothes. He was speaking to someone unseen. His lips moved, but only fragments of sound reached her. They're not what we thought. The vision fractured. Another image formed. Him kneeling at the base of that massive jungle tree, vines coiling around his arms, the glow enveloping him like liquid fire. He looked terrified, but then calm, peaceful even. Then the light died, leaving only her own reflection. Once more, Clara dropped the pendant. It hit the floor with a dull crack, but didn't break. She staggered back, breathing hard, pulse echoing in her ears. The jungle outside seemed to answer. The chorus of insects had stopped again. Silence pressed in on all sides. Her rational mind screamed that it was hallucination, exhaustion, stress. But another part of her, the quieter, older part, recognized truth. She'd seen something more than memory. Something recorded. Her uncle had found a way to capture not just events, but awareness itself. The jungle remembers what we do not. His words echoed. She sat back on the bed, gripping the pendant tightly. The faint hum returned, this time not from the jungle, but from beneath her feet. The cabin's foundation seemed to vibrate. She rose and pressed her palm against the floorboards. Warmth pulsed through them, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Something alive was beneath her. She grabbed the compass from the table. It spun once, then froze, pointing straight down again, unwavering. "The roots," she whispered. "They run beneath the house." She retrieved the journal and turned to a passage she hadn't noticed before. It was written sideways in the margin. "Not all who witness can leave unchanged. The first seed remembers you. If it calls again, listen, but do not answer." A loud creak broke through the quiet. The lamp flickered, shadows twitching across the walls. From the corner she heard the faint sound of wood shifting, then a knock, once, then again, slow, heavy. She turned, heart pounding. The door was shut. The sound came not from outside, but beneath the floor. She knelt again, pressed her ear against the boards. A whisper rose, muffled, fragmented, but unmistakably human. "Clara!" She stumbled back, gripping the pendant. The glow inside flickered in rhythm with the sound. "Stop!" she whispered. "Stop, please!" But the voice continued, rising in tone, urgent pleading. Then just as suddenly, it ceased. Only the rain remained. Clara sank to the floor, trembling. The pendant's light faded once more. When she finally looked toward the window, something moved beyond the glass. A faint silhouette in the mist. Not quite human, too still, too slender. Vines trailed from its arms like veins. She blinked. It was gone. Clara turned back toward the pendant, holding it in her palm. She thought of the word again, witness. If the jungle had memory, then perhaps her uncle's work had gone beyond study. Perhaps he had become a part of it, and if that were true, then what she'd just seen outside the window wasn't a ghost. It was a remnant. The jungle didn't haunt. It remembered, and now it was remembering her. Clara found it the next morning while searching for dry wood. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, mist rising off the jungle like steam from a living body. The air smelled of wet moss and decay, dense, old, alive. She pulled open the lower cupboards to check for matches when her hand brushed against a loose panel. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal reel case no larger than her palm. It was cold to the touch, the metal pitted with rust. A strip of faded tape on its side bore her uncle's familiar handwriting, Project Verdant, Session 4. She stared at it, heart tight. He'd stopped labeling anything after Session 3 in the journal. That had been the last entry before his writing turned erratic. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the room where the old film projector sat on a shelf, half buried under dust and cobwebs. She didn't remember noticing it before. Lightning flickered far off, silent. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, watchful. After a moment's hesitation, she set up the projector on the table, threading the brittle film carefully through the reels. When she flipped the switch, the machine whirred to life with a low hum. Light bloomed against the far wall, at first, static. Then the image stabilized. Her uncle's face filled the frame. He looked older than she remembered, his expression tight and tired. Behind him the jungle loomed, blurred by heat and distance. Uncle, on film, day 64. The root network expands faster than expected. Signal coherence, improving. The subjects respond to memory stimuli. He turned the camera. In the clearing behind him stood a series of glass cylinders filled with murky liquid. Within each, a shape, vines and fragments of bone fused together. When twitched, Clara's breath caught Uncle on film. They retain resonance, traces of what they once were. The consciousness doesn't fade, only changes. It's not death. It's transfer, integration. The image flickered. Another shot appeared, nighttime. Her uncle knelt in the same clearing, lit by lanterns. He drew circles in the dirt, then pressed a glowing seed into the ground. The camera shook as the earth around it pulsed, glowing faintly. The vines in the cylinders writhed as though awakened. Uncle on film. If the jungle is memory, then we're the forgetting. The only way forward is to remember together. His hand reached toward the lens, and for a split second his eyes glowed the same amber as the seed. The reel clicked to an end. The machine kept spinning, its hum filling the silence. Clara shut it off, trembling. The wall went dark. The air inside the cabin was still. Yet her skin prickled as if watched. She replayed the words in her mind. Transfer, integration, remember together. Her uncle hadn't been studying the jungle. He'd been merging with it. She turned to the journal, flipping to the last few pages. The entries had grown desperate, manic. They showed me how. The boundary isn't fixed. I saw her, Clara, years before she was born. The memory of the seed carried her name. The words blurred before her eyes. She slammed the journal shut. Outside, thunder rolled again. Clara moved to the window. Through the mist, the jungle shimmered faintly. Some of the trees near the clearing glowed, a dim amber pulse beneath their bark, like veins of living light. She whispered to herself, "You're imagining it." But the pulse kept rhythm with her heartbeat. She stepped outside into the drizzle, clutching the pendant. The jungle felt closer now, its sounds thicker, slower. Every leaf seemed to listen. At the edge of the clearing she saw movement, shapes like human outlines forming and fading within the mist. Not solid, not ghosts. Memories, looping like the film she'd just seen. Her uncle stood among them. His form flickered, his face indistinct, but she knew that stance. His hand lifted slightly, beckoning her. She wanted to run. Yet part of her, deeper, quieter, longed to follow. The pendant grew warm in her palm. The whisper returned. Witness? She stepped forward once, twice. The figures wavered, light bleeding into the rain. Then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they vanished. Only the jungle remained, ancient, watching. Clara turned back toward the cabin. From the open doorway, she saw the projector still faintly glowing, even though it was unplugged. A single frame of film spun slowly within, looping endlessly. On the wall behind it, a new image appeared, a shadow of her own silhouette. Standing where her uncle once stood in the footage, she froze for a moment. It looked like she was the one holding the lantern, the one at the center of the circle. Then the light flickered and died. Clara backed away, heart hammering, and whispered into the empty cabin, "What did you do, Uncle?" The jungle outside answered not in words, but in a slow, resonant hum that rose from the ground and echoed through the walls, vibrating her bones. She clutched the pendant against her chest, its faint glow synchronizing with the pulse beneath her feet. Project Verdant wasn't just research. It was inheritance, and the jungle wasn't finished with her yet. By evening, Clara's nerves were frayed thin. The air inside the cabin felt dense, saturated with moisture and the faint scent of decay. She had barely eaten since dawn, and the events of the past 2 days, voices, visions, her uncle's haunting footage, had left her straddling the thin edge between belief and breakdown. She decided to search the cabin one last time before returning to the village at first light. It wasn't bravery anymore, it was exhaustion, the need to reclaim some measure of control. Under the bed, her hand brushed against something rough. She pulled out an old canvas satchel, its leather straps brittle, the initials SM barely visible on the flap. Inside were fragments of papers, a folded map, and a small bone object wrapped in cloth. It was a whistle, no larger than her thumb. The craftsmanship was delicate, each curve marked by the same vine patterns she'd seen carved into the hatch and etched onto the pendant. But the carvings weren't merely decorative. They pulsed faintly with a dim amber light that matched the seed's glow. She turned it over in her hand. The mouthpiece was smooth from use, on impulse or perhaps guided by something deeper. She brought it to her. Lips and blue, no sound came, but the jungle outside stirred. A shiver passed through the floorboards. Then the distant trees began to rustle, though there was no wind. The insects fell silent. The frogs stopped their croaking. And even the rain seemed to pause mid-air. Clara's breath hitched. Then from somewhere beyond the cabin came a low harmonic tone, not mechanical, not natural but alive. It thrummed through her ribs like a heartbeat. She stepped to the window. The jungle glowed faintly beneath the mist. Every vine, every trunk, every leaf seemed lit from within. The forest wasn't reacting to her. It was answering her. The whistle in her hand felt warm now, almost alive. Her fingers tingled where they touched it. In her uncle's journal, she found a short note written sideways in the margin of a torn page. The soundless call activates the memory root. The jungle listens only to its own. Her pulse quickened. Its own. She closed the notebook and whispered to herself, "What are you trying to make me?" The hum outside grew stronger, shifting into a resonance that made the windows rattle. She could feel it inside her chest, syncing with her pulse, and then silence. The light in the jungle faded, leaving only the whisper of rain. She exhaled, shaken. For a moment she thought it was over. Then something moved beyond the tree line, a shape almost human but too long, too sinuous. It leaned slightly as though listening. She raised the whistle again, unsure why. Perhaps part of her wanted to prove she still held control over something, anything. Before she could blow, a voice, soft, broken, came from behind her. "Don't," she turned. The cabin was empty. The air shimmered faintly, and for an instant she saw the outline of her uncle, standing near the doorway. His form was translucent, trembling like heat haze. His eyes were hollow but aware. "Clara," he said. "You're calling it," her voice caught.
"What is it?"
"The memory root. The first one." His form flickered. "I kept it buried." "You've woken it." She shook her head. "I don't understand. What does it want?" His gaze softened. "To finish remembering." The figure faded, the last of his outline dissolving into dust that shimmered like pollen. The whistle pulsed once in her hand. The vines outside began to creep closer, inching up the cabin walls, their tips quivering. Panic surged through her. She ran to the door, but when she pulled it open, the jungle was unrecognizable. The path she had used was gone, replaced by a web of roots, all pulsing faintly beneath the rain. The forest floor itself seemed to breathe. She stumbled back inside and slammed the door. The whistle slipped from her hand and rolled under the table. A sound rose then, not the deep hum of before, but whispering, countless voices murmuring just below hearing. They came from the walls, from beneath the floor, from within the air. She grabbed the journal again, flipping through its final pages, looking for sense in the madness. If the whistle calls them, it calls me too. The network remembers all who touched the seed. Every soundless note is an awakening. Her hands shook. She pressed the page flat, staring at the final line. When she blows the whistle, the jungle will know her as one of its own. Clara froze. She could almost hear his voice, gentle but pleading. Don't. Her reflection in the window caught her eye. For a moment the glass distorted, her face rippled like water. The vines outside mirrored her movement, bending toward her image. She stepped closer, and her reflection seemed to tilt its head independently. Then, from deep within the jungle, came an answering hum. Louder this time, clearer. The ground shook. Clara fell to her knees, clutching her ears as the air vibrated. The vines outside burst through the cracks in the window frames, slithering across the floor like veins of living light. They didn't strike. They stopped, curling around her like sentinels. The hum softened, settling into a steady rhythm, her rhythm. The jungle had recognized her, and in that moment, Clara understood. She hadn't inherited a cabin. She'd inherited a place in something much older. The whistle lay at her feet, glowing softly. Its carvings pulsed once, then dimmed, as though satisfied. Outside, the jungle exhaled. The rain began again, gentle and slow. Clara sat motionless in the center of the room, the journal open beside her, the vines withdrawing inch by inch. For now, the forest slept. But she could still feel its memory inside her. Alive, listening, waiting. Clara woke before dawn. The cabin drenched in silver fog. The jungle outside was still, too still. No insects, no birds, not even the wind dared move. Her dreams had been thick with whispers and flashes of her uncle's face, and when she sat up, she half expected to see him standing in the corner again. Instead, she saw movement near the table. A faint green shimmer pulsed beneath the wooden boards, tracing out a perfect circle. She approached cautiously. The glow brightened with each step, as if responding to her presence. The table legs cast sharp, twisting shadows across the floor. She knelt and ran her fingers along the grain. There, beneath a thin layer of dust, was a faint outline. Something was hidden under the planks. Using the tip of her knife, she pried at the edges until one board lifted with a sharp creak. Beneath it, half buried in the soil, lay a brass disc the size of a dinner plate, covered in moss, tangled roots, and faintly luminescent markings. When she brushed the dirt away, she saw that the markings weren't carved, they were alive. Tiny veins of green light ran through them like capillaries, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. In the center was a glass dome. Inside it, roots swirled like liquid, shifting slowly to point in one direction, then twitching and turning to another. A compass. Except the needle wasn't metal. It was a cluster of living vines, moving as if searching. Clara's breath hitched. "What are you pointing to?" The compass glowed brighter, and the vines realigned, now steady. The light pointed toward the east wall, where the old hatch lay sealed. Of course, she sat back, heart pounding. Her uncle's notes had mentioned a convergence beneath the cabin. Maybe this was how he found it, or how it found him. She reached for the journal again and flipped to a torn page where her uncle had sketched strange circular diagrams. At the bottom, one line stood out: "The compass follows the pulse. The root system beneath is sentient. Once it aligns, the path to the heart opens. The heart." She whispered the word aloud. It hung in the air, heavy, electric. The jungle outside shuddered, as if hearing her. Suddenly the lamp flickered and went out. The entire cabin dimmed into darkness except for the faint, ghostly glow from the compass. Its vines were now spinning slowly, as though impatient. Clara swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to stop, to leave whatever this was buried, but the need to know, to finish what her uncle started, overpowered the fear. She grabbed her flashlight and moved toward the hatch. The metal ring was cold and slick beneath her palm. When she pulled, it resisted, then gave way with a sharp groan. A gust of air rushed up, damp and earthy, laced with the scent of decay. She shined the light downward. Wooden steps descended into darkness. The compass's glow flared suddenly, casting shadows that twisted across the walls. The vines now pointed directly into the hatch. Clara hesitated at the threshold. "You want me to go down there?" she murmured. The compass pulsed once in response. She clipped the flashlight to her jacket and began to climb down. Each step creaked under her weight, the air growing colder and wetter the deeper she went. At the bottom, she found a narrow tunnel carved into the rock. The walls were covered in roots that pulsed faintly with that same internal light, leading her like a trail of veins. The tunnel twisted, then opened into a cavern no larger than a small room. In the center was a stone pedestal, half swallowed by moss. The air hummed with a deep, low vibration, like standing beside a massive generator, though there was no machinery here. Clara's light caught something carved into the pedestal, concentric circles with vine patterns connecting them, identical to those on the compass. As she approached, the compass in her hand began to vibrate violently, the vines within its glass. Dome coiled tighter, their light merging into a single bright pulse. Then the glass cracked, a fine mist hissed out, smelling faintly metallic and sweet. The compass went dark. Clara stepped back, but the ground beneath her shuddered. The roots on the walls retracted, revealing something embedded deep within the rock. A large, heart-shaped structure made entirely of intertwining roots and pulsing veins. It moved, slowly, rhythmically, like it was breathing. She couldn't look away. The rhythm matched her pulse. Her uncle's voice echoed faintly in her mind, as though from another life. The heart remembers every touch, every breath. It doesn't die. It learns. The compass in her palm twitched once more, a final spark lighting up its cracked glass face. Then a small portion of the heart began to move, unraveling like fingers curling open. A single root slid toward her. It stopped inches from her boot, trembling, as if waiting for permission. Clara's chest rose and fell. "You're not supposed to be real," she whispered. The root touched her ankle, her breath caught. Visions flooded her mind. Flashes of her uncle kneeling in this very chamber, whispering to the living heart. His hands covered in dirt, his eyes black with the same green glow. Then she saw others, figures, faces blurred by time, all drawn here, some reaching out to touch the heart, some screaming as they were pulled beneath it. The vision ended with a single image, her uncle placing the compass into the floor above, sealing it away and whispering, "When she finds you, guide her to me." Clara stumbled backward, gasping. The heart pulsed again, stronger this time. The sound filled the tunnel, a deep, steady beat that made the walls tremble. The compass in her hand cracked completely and fell apart, its vines withering into dust. And in the darkness, her uncle's voice came again, softer now, like a prayer. "You've opened the path, Clara. Now it remembers you too." The roots shifted closer, reaching, and the last light of her flashlight flickered before going out. The jungle's pulse continued in the dark, slow and endless. It no longer beat alone. When morning broke, the jungle exhaled mist across the clearing. Clara sat by the cabin's broken window, her hands trembling as she turned over what remained of the vine compass. The glass was shattered, the roots inside had turned grey and dry. yet faint marks of green shimmered along her palm where she had touched it. It almost looked like veins. Her veins had borrowed the light from that strange thing. The jungle was awake again, singing with cicadas and dripping with dew. But beneath that familiar rhythm was a slow hum she couldn't shake, something like a pulse beneath the earth. The same rhythm she'd heard in the underground chamber. It was faint, yet steady, as if the cabin itself was breathing with her. She forced herself to focus. Fear could wait. Questions couldn't. She opened her uncle's leather-bound journal on the table, flipping past brittle pages filled with sketches, notes, and stains that looked far too dark to be ink. One entry caught her eye, dated only year 23. The mirror map is the key. It doesn't show where you are. It shows when you're standing. Hold it to the flame, and it reveals the moments the jungle tries to forget. Clara frowned. She scanned the cabin, her gaze landing on the east wall, where the wood panels were warped and swollen. The writing continued. Hide it behind the memory wall. It must not fall into the wrong hands. Her pulse quickened. She rose, pushing the table aside and running her fingers over the boards. The panel in question felt slightly hollow, the nails rusted from decades of damp air. She pried at the seams until one plank loosened with a sigh of rot. Behind it lay a thin, circular object wrapped in black cloth. When she lifted it, dust fell like grey snow onto her boots. The object was cold, heavier than it looked, and perfectly round. The metal surface reflected light oddly, not as a mirror should. It seemed to shimmer from within, as though it was remembering its own light. She unwrapped it completely and held it toward the oil lamp. For a moment, it reflected nothing but her pale face. Then faint etchings began to appear, lines, symbols, curves, slowly burning into visibility like frost melting on glass. The map was reversed. Every marking seemed to flow inward instead of outward, forming a whirlpool at the center. Clara tilted. It left, and the reflection shifted, not to show her behind it, but the room as it used to be. In the mirror's surface, she saw the cabin whole again, untouched by vines or mold. Her uncle sat at the table, writing feverishly under the same lamp that now barely flickered beside her. He looked up suddenly, as if hearing her. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Then in the mirror he stood, lifted the compass, and walked toward the hatch, the same one she had opened the night before. "Show me where," she whispered, her breath fogging the surface. The map pulsed. The whirlpool of symbols began to spin slowly, and a new pattern emerged, a circle marked with 3 notches. Each notch glowed faintly, like points on a clock. She reached out, tracing the notches with her fingertip. As she did, the air grew heavier. The shadows along the wall deepened, pooling into shapes that hinted at movement. Her uncle's reflection in the mirror map turned toward her again. His eyes, black and filled with green light, stared directly into hers. Then he whispered a single word that rippled through the metal like a ripple in water. "Beneath." The lamp sputtered. The jungle fell silent. Clara stumbled backward, nearly dropping the mirror. When she looked again, the reflection had returned to normal, just her face, pale and frightened. But the word still echoed in her mind. Beneath. She remembered the chamber, the heart, the vines, that living pulse. Could there be more beneath? Another layer, another secret. She gathered herself and tucked the mirror map under her arm. Whatever her uncle had buried down there, he hadn't wanted it found easily. The compass had led her to the first door. The mirror, she suspected, was the next. Outside, the air had turned heavy again. Clouds gathered thick and grey above the canopy. She stepped out into the clearing and scanned the tree line. The jungle wasn't still this time. It seemed to lean inward, its vines coiling around trunks like listening serpents. Her flashlight flickered when she aimed it toward the river path. The air smelled faintly metallic, just like the mist that had hissed from the compass. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, seemed to form syllables, distant and indistinct, like the jungle was learning to speak her name. She turned back toward the cabin. On the window, drawn in condensation, were 3 small symbols, circles with notches, identical to those on the mirror map. She wiped them away quickly, her pulse spiking. But as she did, she noticed something else, the faintest hum beneath her feet. The same steady rhythm, pulsing like a heartbeat through the floorboards. It wasn't coming from the chamber anymore. It was moving. Clara stood still, listening. The pulse shifted under her boots, sliding slowly toward the eastern wall, the one she had just opened to find the map. The lamp flickered again. For a moment her shadow on the wall wasn't her own. It stood taller, its head tilted differently, like something mimicking her too late to get it right. She gripped the mirror map tighter and whispered, "Uncle, what did you wake up here?" The jungle did not answer. But far below, the heartbeat quickened. The pendant wasn't there when Clara fell asleep. She was certain of it. She had collapsed on the old couch near the fire, exhausted after trying to decipher the mirror map again. When she awoke, the embers had died, and dawn's first grey light seeped through the cracks in the boarded windows. On the table before her lay the pendant, small, smooth and impossibly black, as if it had absorbed every color that had ever touched it. Her uncle's journal lay open beside it. She hadn't left it that way. The page, now exposed, bore only 2 words, written in shaky ink: "Wear it." Clara hesitated. The cord looked fragile, yet the pendant itself seemed ancient, heavier than stone should be. She touched it lightly, and the cabin seemed to exhale, a faint draught through the cracks, a low creak from the floorboards, as though the house recognized it. When her fingers brushed the eye-shaped stone, a shiver ran up her arm. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. She lifted it by the cord, watching it turn slowly in the dim light. Inside the obsidian, faint ripples moved like liquid smoke, forming the outline of veins or roots. She pressed it to her palm. It pulsed once, faintly in rhythm with her heart, that same pulse, the one that had haunted her since the chamber. Her uncle's voice seemed to echo in her memory again, low and distant. The heart chooses its next keeper. When it knows your rhythm, it follows you. Clara drew a long breath, slipped the pendant around her neck and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then the jungle outside fell silent. The air in the cabin thickened, as though the world itself had paused to listen. The pendant began to glow faintly, not green like before, but a warm amber, the color of fire through whiskey glass. The pulse quickened beneath her ribs. She stumbled toward the door, driven by a pull she didn't understand. When she stepped outside, the dawn light had turned strange, muted, almost gold-dusted. The trees appeared taller, their leaves curling toward her like open palms. The path to the river shimmered. The mist there swirled with purpose, forming subtle shapes that vanished when she blinked. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she couldn't. Her feet moved of their own accord, drawn by that soft humming from the pendant. As she reached the riverbank, the air changed again. The water was still, not a ripple, not a sound. And then she saw it, a reflection that wasn't hers. In the water stood her uncle, exactly as he appeared in the mirror map, older, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but alive. He stared up at her from beneath the surface, his lips moving silently. Then slowly he lifted his hand, revealing that he too wore the obsidian pendant. She crouched near the edge, whispering, "What do you want me to do?" The reflection blinked. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pointed downstream, toward the darker part of the jungle, where the fog hung thick as cloth. When she looked back at the water, his reflection was gone. Only her own pale face stared back. Clara rose, heart pounding. The pendant burned hot against her chest, pulsing faster. She turned toward where he had pointed. The path there was almost invisible, overgrown with vines and thorns, but under the amber light, a faint line glowed, roots forming a trail that wound deeper into the forest. She followed. The deeper she went, the older the jungle felt. The trunks grew wider, the air heavier with the scent of earth and decay. Every so often, she caught glimpses of shapes among the trees, figures that vanished when she looked directly at them. At one point, she stumbled upon a weathered stone, half buried in moss. It bore her uncle's initials, crudely carved, along with a single phrase, "The watchers never sleep." She stepped back, uneasy. The pendant pulsed again, once sharply. The roots beneath her feet began to move. At first it was subtle, like settling soil. Then suddenly the ground shifted. The roots twisted and split, forming a narrow gap no wider than a doorway. From it rose a faint light, the same amber hue as her pendant. Clara crouched, peering into the opening. Beneath the tangled roots lay another chamber, smaller than the first. Its walls slick with moisture and veined with glowing sap. Something gleamed at the center, a stone pedestal, identical to the one she'd seen before. Resting atop it was a carved wooden box. She climbed down carefully, the pendant illuminating the space around her. The hum of the jungle had vanished entirely. Only her breathing and the steady thump of her heart filled the air. The box was old, but untouched by rot. Its lid was engraved with the same swirling pattern from the mirror map, the whirlpool of reversed lines. When she touched the lid, the pendant grew hot enough to sting. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay another pendant, identical to hers, except cracked straight down the center. Beneath it was a folded scrap of paper, yellowed and damp. She unfolded it gently. The handwriting was her uncle's. "If you found this, the heart has chosen you. But know this, Clara. Each keeper lives half in memory, half in shadow. The jungle does not protect. It consumes. Guard your pulse well!" Her hand shook. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. The pendant dimmed, cooling slowly. For a moment all was still. Then, from somewhere deeper in the jungle, she heard it again. That heartbeat, louder now, closer. The trees shuddered. The roots in the chamber began to crawl up the walls, winding around her ankles. The cracked pendant inside the box glowed faintly, its broken halves trembling as if trying to join again. Clara clutched her pendant tightly, whispering, "You want me to finish what he started, don't you?" The air answered with a single pulse, deep, resonant, alive, and beneath her feet, the ground began to move. The earth had moved again in the night. Clara could feel it before she even opened her eyes, the walls of the cabin subtly trembling, a slow pulse that no storm could cause. She sat up, the pendant against her chest faintly glowing, and saw the lantern sitting beside the hearth. It hadn't been there before. The metal was old and blackened, the glass cloudy with age. Yet as she leaned closer, the wick inside sparked to life on its own, the flame rising in an unnatural bloom of orange and green. Her uncle's handwriting covered the side of the lantern in faint scratches. "Do not listen too long." Clara hesitated, then lifted it by its handle. The flame steadied, the hum beneath the floor softened. And then, from within the glass came the sound of breathing, not her own, but overlapping voices whispering through the flickering light. She froze. One voice, deep and weary, rose above the rest. "Clara," it said, her name spoken as though from a great distance. She dropped the lantern in shock, but it did not break. The flame burned steady on the wooden floor, without leaving a scorch. Her uncle's voice continued, calm but desperate. "If you are hearing this, then the cycle has begun again. The jungle remembers new blood. You must not—" The voice fractured, turning to static. Then another took its place, female, frightened. "It watches us now, beneath the roots. It listens when we sleep." Clara bent down, shaking, and picked up the lantern. The voices rippled like water, disturbed by stone, hundreds of whispers rising and falling in waves. Faces flickered faintly within the glass, like reflections under moving light. She wanted to smash it, to end the noise. But the pendant around her neck began to pulse in response, syncing perfectly with the rhythm of the whispers. The voices quieted. Then one by one, they aligned into a single word, "Follow." The flame turned white. Clara stepped back as the room filled with light. The cabin's walls melted away, replaced by the illusion of the jungle itself, dense, alive, breathing. It wasn't memory or hallucination. It was the past, projected through the lantern. She stood within it. The air smelled fresher, younger. The trees were smaller. In front of her, she saw her uncle, alive, walking through the clearing, the same lantern in his hand. Behind him trailed three others she didn't recognize, a man with an old rifle, a woman clutching maps, and a younger boy barely in his 20s. They spoke softly, unaware of her presence. "You're certain it's here?" the man asked. Her uncle nodded. "It beats just beneath us. We only need to listen." They stopped where the cabin would one day stand. The boy knelt, pressing his ear to the ground. "It's warm," he whispered. "Like it's breathing." Clara's throat tightened. The image flickered. The woman turned suddenly toward where Clara stood, her face pale. She couldn't see her, not truly, but her gaze met Clara's, as if recognizing something. Then, in a trembling voice, she said, "She's coming. The one who carries the rhythm." The lantern's light exploded, and the illusion shattered. Clara fell backward onto the cabin floor, gasping. The voices had stopped, replaced once again by the faint hum of the earth. The lantern burned steadily beside her, the green in its flame gone, replaced by a clear, steady gold. She stared at it, trembling. The heart wasn't just alive, it was aware. It had seen generations come and go, binding them to itself through rhythm, memory, and blood. Her uncle had been only one in a line of keepers. And she was the next, but why? The pendant against her chest grew warm again, almost tender, as if in reassurance. She whispered, "You think I belong to you?" The cabin creaked in reply, a single beam of sunlight cutting through the roof to fall upon the lantern. In that light, she saw new etchings appear across its glass, symbols she hadn't noticed before. When she leaned closer, she realized they were names, dozens of them carved in thin strokes, repeating over and over. Near the bottom, beneath her uncle's name, another had appeared, Clara Wren. She staggered back. Her name wasn't carved when she found the lantern. It had appeared only now, after she touched it, after she heard them. The heart had accepted her. The floor vibrated again, and the pendant flared brighter than ever before. She heard the faint sound of roots shifting beneath the ground. Like ropes tightening, she gripped the lantern tightly, whispering through clenched teeth, "If you remember me, then you'll remember this. I won't be buried here." The flame quivered, as though it understood. She turned and ran for the hatch. The tunnel below called to her, pulsing with that endless rhythm. The closer she came, the stronger the pull became, until the lantern's flame bent toward the darkness, like it was being drawn inside. She descended, each step echoing louder than the last, until the air thickened again with that metallic sweetness at the bottom. The chamber's roots had grown wider, twisting in slow motion. The pedestal where the compass once lay now cradled something else, a heart-shaped mass of roots. Freshly pulsing, the lantern flared once more. Whispers rose from the chamber walls, forming a chorus that sounded like her uncle's voice, her own, and countless others, all overlapping into a single breath. "Welcome back." Clara lifted the lantern high. Eyes narrowed. "If you remember everything, then remember why we leave." She brought the lantern down against the heart. The flame met the roots, and light surged through the chamber like sunrise breaking beneath the soil. The jungle screamed. The explosion of light had shaken the ground for miles. For hours afterward, the jungle had been silent, eerily, unnaturally silent. When Clara finally woke, she lay sprawled on the forest floor, her palms caked in ash and moss, her lungs raw with smoke. The lantern was gone, its handle melted into black wire. Above her the canopy swayed without wind. The birds had vanished. Even the insects held their breath. Clara rolled to her side and coughed hard. The pendant around her neck pulsed faintly, but its rhythm had slowed. Once steady and synchronized with the heart, it now beat out of time, weak and faltering. She rose to her knees. The cabin was nowhere in sight, only the hollow where it once stood, swallowed by roots that now curled inward like burned paper. Then she saw it, half buried near the base of a split tree. Its brass surface cracked but glinting faintly in the dim light. A compass. Her uncle's compass. She hesitated, then brushed off the dirt and pried it open. The glass was fractured, the markings scorched. The needle spun wildly, never settling on a direction. It turned so fast it seemed almost alive, twitching like an insect pinned beneath glass. And yet, when she whispered her uncle's name, the needle stopped. It pointed not north, but toward the hollow where the cabin once stood. She turned her head slowly. The air shimmered faintly there. A distortion in the space just above the ground, as if the world itself was breathing. She clutched the compass tighter and took a step forward. The distortion grew. Her pendant vibrated violently, tugging her backward, but she ignored it. Whatever remained beneath that hollow was calling her. The same pull her uncle must have followed years ago. When she stepped through the distortion, the world tilted. She was no longer in the forest. She stood in a mirror of it, an inverted jungle where the trees grew upside down, their roots hanging from the ceiling like stalactites. Water flowed upward into the sky. The air smelled metallic, thick, and strangely familiar. At her feet a shallow path wound through the undergrowth, lit by faintly glowing spores. She moved carefully, the compass still spinning in her hand. Then, voices faint, echoing through the air like murmurs in a dream. Clara. She turned, heart pounding. The sound came from the direction the compass now pointed, a clearing just ahead. She walked toward it, her boots crunching through the spore-dusted soil. The clearing opened like a wound in the inverted world. And there, suspended in the air, hung a faint image of her uncle. Not flesh, not ghost, something in between. His face flickered, as though reflected on the surface of deep water. "Clara," he said again. His voice trembled. "You broke the link," she swallowed. "You left me no choice," he smiled weakly. "You've done what I couldn't. You made it remember pain." The compass needle stopped spinning. It pointed directly at him. Her uncle's face began to distort, flickering into multiple shapes. Hers, the boy from the vision, and others she didn't recognize. "But you must finish what I began." "It's not dead. The heart never dies. It renews." The ground quivered beneath her feet. The trees groaned. "What do you mean?" she asked. He stepped closer, the illusion of his body bending and unraveling like smoke. "Every time we resist it, we give it more to feed on. Our defiance, our fear, our memory. It doesn't crave obedience, Clara. It craves the fight." The words chilled her. The compass trembled in her palm, its needle glowing red now, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Her uncle reached out a fading hand. "If you want to escape, you must stop giving it something to remember." Clara looked down. The compass burned hot in her hand. Then she understood. The jungle's strength came from memory, from everything that lingered. The whispers, the names, the marks carved into glass and metal. It was a living archive of human fear. To destroy it, she couldn't fight it. She had to make it forget. The illusion of her uncle smiled sadly, as though hearing her thought. "You see it now. It remembers love the longest." And then he was gone. The inverted world began to crumble. Roots snapped free, the soil turning to dust beneath her boots. She ran, the compass in her hand flaring brighter with each step. The pendant's rhythm steadied, strong again, alive. It guided her upward, through a tunnel of light that cut through the falling dark. When she emerged, she was back in the real jungle, breathless, kneeling in the clearing under a pale grey dawn. The hollow where the cabin had been was now nothing but flat black earth. The compass lay in her hand, cracked and silent. The needle had stopped moving completely. But when she turned it over, she found something new carved into the back. "To end it, end yourself within it." The words weren't her uncle's handwriting. They were hers. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't written that. Not yet. The jungle around her began to hum again, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat returning after death. Clara rose slowly, clutching the compass to her chest. The forest wanted her back, and this time it was remembering her. The morning came grey and heavy, the mist crawling low along the ground like smoke. Clara moved through it in silence, her breath shallow, her clothes still damp from the night. Every sound, every crack of twig, every whisper of leaves felt amplified, deliberate, as though the jungle was listening again. She carried the broken compass in one pocket and the mirror shard in the other, its edges wrapped in cloth to keep from cutting her fingers. The shard had been lying near the blackened ground where the cabin once stood. When she'd picked it up, it hadn't shown her reflection, only flickers of memory. Her uncle writing by candlelight, the hidden cellar door, the first time she'd opened the pendant. Now it pulsed faintly with warmth against her thigh. She reached a clearing where sunlight tried to break through the canopy but failed, scattered into thin, wavering beams. In the center of that dim light stood a tree, older than the rest, its bark carved with countless names. She ran her fingers over the engravings. Some were familiar: Samuel Rains, H. Rains, 1897. But beneath them, a new one glimmered faintly, freshly burned into the wood. Clara Rains. She stepped back, heart quickening. The tree's roots quivered, curling inward like claws. The name on its trunk shimmered faintly, as though still being written. The jungle was rewriting her story in real time. She drew out the mirror shard and held it up to the trunk. The glass fogged instantly, then cleared, showing not the clearing she stood in, but the cabin again, whole and unburned. Through its window she saw herself inside, sitting at the table, reading the letter. The version of her in the reflection looked peaceful, unaware. Then slowly, the figure in the mirror turned its head and looked directly at her. Clara dropped the shard, stumbling backward. The glass didn't shatter. It sank into the soil like water. Behind her, something shifted. She turned sharply. Out from the trees stepped three figures, shadows shaped like people but hollow inside, their faces blurred, their forms trembling at the edges. They moved in unison, silent but certain. Clara froze. One of them raised its head. Its voice came like wind through a hollow trunk. "You shouldn't have made it remember your name." She backed away. "What are you?" The shadow tilted its head as though amused. "What's left of everyone who ever tried to leave." They stepped closer, their movements gliding rather than walking. The air around them shimmered, the mist curling inward like drawn breath. Clara clutched the pendant at her chest. Its rhythm beat faster, sinking again with something beneath her feet, the thrum of the earth, the pulse of the heart below. The shadows hesitated. For the first time, they seemed uncertain. Clara took that moment to run. Branches tore at her arms as she crashed through the undergrowth. The path twisted and folded back on itself, as though the jungle didn't want to let her move in a straight line. The compass in her pocket jerked and spun wildly, its broken needles scraping against glass. She tripped and fell hard, the mirror shard tumbling free from the cloth. It landed before her, unbroken again, and reflected not the ground but a doorway, a cellar door. Her uncle's voice echoed faintly through the trees. "Beneath it all, the truth sleeps." She scrambled toward the reflection, half crawling, half dragging herself through the vines. When she reached it, she pressed her hand to the shard. The air rippled, and she fell through. The cellar was exactly as she remembered it. Shelves lined with dusty jars, maps scattered across the workbench, and the faint smell of oil and damp wood. But the difference now was the hum. It wasn't faint anymore. It was thunderous, filling the walls, the floor, the air itself. On the far side of the room stood another door. This one she hadn't seen before. Its surface gleamed like stone wet from rain, etched with spiraling markings that pulsed with light. The pendant's rhythm synced perfectly with it. She stepped closer. Her uncle's journals had spoken of this, the chamber beneath the cabin, the heart chamber. He'd believed it to be a gateway, not to another world, but to the jungle's mind itself. When she touched the door, her fingers buzzed with warmth. The markings pulsed faster, the rhythm quickening. Then, with a sound like breath exhaled through stone, it opened. A stairway led down into darkness. She hesitated for only a moment, then descended. The deeper she went, the louder the sound became. Not mechanical, not human. It was organic, a beating slow and immense. The air grew thick, heavy with humidity and scent of iron. At the bottom, she emerged into a vast chamber lit by veins of glowing root that ran along the walls like lightning frozen mid-burst. In the center, half submerged in a pool of luminous water, pulsed something vast and alive. The heart. It wasn't a shape she could fully grasp. Part root, part flesh, part stone. Every beat sent ripples across the chamber floor, and with each pulse came visions. Her uncle, the villagers, the forest itself, swallowing and birthing new life in endless rhythm. Clara stepped forward, entranced. The mirror shard in her hand began to tremble, glowing with the same light as the heart. The pendant burned hot against her chest. She understood then what the shard really was. Not just a remnant of glass, but a window into the past. The heart had been watching through it, reflecting what it remembered. She held the shard up toward the glowing mass. Its surface cleared, revealing her uncle again, standing beside the heart. He spoke softly. "It's waiting for you to choose." Her voice came out a whisper. "Choose what? To let it forget, or let it feed?" The heart pulsed once, long and deep, shaking the air around her. The mirror cracked. The chamber dimmed, and Clara realized the jungle wasn't asking her to destroy it. It was asking her to join it. The walls of the chamber seemed to breathe. With every beat of the heart, the air expanded and contracted, stirring dust and fragments of forgotten roots. Clara stood still, half blinded by the shifting light, the mirror shard trembling in her grip. The whisper of her uncle's voice still lingered. Let it forget, or let it feed, the question clawed at her. Forgetting meant erasure, obliterating all memory of the jungle's history, its voice, perhaps even her uncle's essence. Feeding, though, that meant offering something in return, something living. Her hand tightened around the pendant. It pulsed faster, matching her racing heart. The vines engraved upon it seemed to writhe, and from the cracks in the chamber floor, fine tendrils of red light crept upward, winding toward her feet. She backed away slowly. The chamber didn't allow it. The ground shifted gently at first, then more insistently, drawing her closer to the pool that cradled the heart. A memory rose, unbidden, her uncle's journal entry, scrawled in haste. It doesn't consume out of hunger, but remembrance. The forest must remember to live. Clara knelt by the pool's edge, peering into the glowing water. Beneath the ripples, she saw faces. Men and women, villagers, explorers, all drifting like ghosts in amber light. Their eyes were calm, not afraid. Her own reflection appeared beside them. The mirror shard warmed in her hand, its surface clearing again. This time it didn't show the past. It showed the jungle above, the clearing, the ruins of the cabin, and far beyond that, the line where forest met sky. The world that still breathed without knowing this place existed. What happens if I leave? She whispered. The heart's rhythm deepened. The air thickened. Then, like words drawn from the soil itself, a thought pressed against her mind. If you leave, it will sleep again. But sleeping things still dream. Her eyes filled with tears. And if I stay? Then it will remember you. She looked down at her reflection once more. The faces in the water began to fade, one by one, dissolving into light that drifted toward the ceiling. The glow pulsed stronger each time a face vanished. Her uncle's was the last to go. His voice came faintly through the rippling air. You came further than I ever did. She touched the pendant. It was hot now, almost unbearable. The vines on its surface twisted, tightening, as though pulling her inward. Then something inside her shifted. Not pain, something gentler, deeper, like roots taking hold beneath the skin. She gasped, clutching at her chest. The heartbeat that echoed around the chamber faltered, then matched hers exactly, merging into one rhythm. A warmth spread through her arms and legs, through her spine and skull, until the edges of her vision blurred. The walls of the chamber dissolved into green light, and for an instant she saw everything. The jungle, the creatures, the endless growth and decay, the cycle of hunger, rain, bloom, and death, all pulsing with one steady beat. She saw her uncle planting the seed that became the heart, saw the villagers who worshipped it, the men who tried to exploit it, and the forest swallowing them all to preserve balance, and she saw herself standing at the center of it all, the last of the Rains line, holding the choice between memory and silence. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. She whispered, "It deserves to be remembered." The chamber responded with a sound like thunder breaking underwater. Roots shot upward from the pool, wrapping around her wrists, her waist, her shoulders. They didn't pull her down. They lifted her gently toward the ceiling, where the light of the heart poured over her like rain. Her pendant glowed bright red, the vines unfurling, and for the first time, she understood what her uncle meant by keep it safe. It was never about guarding a secret. It was about protecting a consciousness too ancient for human greed. The heart pulsed again, one final resonant beat, and she felt her body dissolve into the light. Her breath merged with the rhythm. Her thoughts softened into echoes. Outside, the jungle stirred. The fog began to clear. Flowers bloomed from ash. The ruins of the cabin vanished, replaced by a grove of trees whose trunks pulsed faintly with red veins. The wind carried a low hum through the branches, a sound not unlike a heartbeat. Deep underground, in the quiet chamber, the pool grew still once more. The pendant, now empty of light, floated briefly before sinking to rest beside the mirror shard, and on the surface of the water, where Clara's reflection had been, there appeared a single engraving of vines forming her name, Clara Rains. It shimmered faintly, then faded into the glow, becoming part of the living memory she had chosen to preserve. The jungle, at last, exhaled. The jungle awoke differently that morning. The air was clearer, the birdsong lower and slower, as though even nature had paused to listen. Where the ruins of the cabin once stood, a grove had grown overnight, thick-trunked trees, their leaves deep emerald, their roots webbed with glowing veins that pulsed faintly beneath the soil. Near the center of that grove lay the seed of glass. It rested in the grass, half buried, catching fragments of sunlight that slipped through the canopy. When the wind passed, it hummed, faint but steady. A jeep rolled slowly up the dirt path, the same road Clara had taken weeks ago. Behind the wheel was Marisol Vega, the forestry inspector who'd filed the missing persons report for Clara Rains. She was a woman in her late 50s, sun-creased skin, patient eyes that had seen too much of human stubbornness against nature's will. She parked near the clearing, stepping out cautiously. The air smelled sweet, too sweet for untouched forest. She crouched, brushing her hand along the earth. It was warm, as though something alive moved just beneath. "Clara?" She called softly. Her voice echoed strangely, carrying further than it should. No answer. She started toward where she remembered the cabin's remains had been, but the structure was gone entirely. Not burned, not decayed, erased. In its place, the grove stood like a cathedral, silent but aware. Marisol froze when she saw the seed. It was unlike anything she'd encountered in her decades of work. The orb pulsed once, as though acknowledging her presence. She knelt beside it. Her reflection curved across its smooth surface, older and distorted, her lined face framed by drifting red mist inside. She reached out and touched it, a flash of warmth, then light. Suddenly, she wasn't in the clearing anymore. She stood inside a memory not her own. The cabin restored, lamplight flickering across its walls. Clara sat at the table writing in a notebook. Across from her, a faint shimmer of light, the outline of a man, older, kind-eyed. Samuel Rains. Their voices were soft, overlapping like layers of thought. Was it always alive? Clara asked. Samuel nodded. Alive, yes, but not as we are. It remembers. We forget, and so it grows. What happens when it remembers too much? Samuel looked down at the pendant around her neck. Then it needs a keeper, the vision wavered. Marisol blinked and found herself back in the clearing, the seed beneath her hand. Her pulse quickened. The orb still glowed faintly, its light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She took a deep breath. Grounding herself. This place is wrong, she whispered. Though the tone in her voice wasn't entirely fear, it was awe. She took out her field notebook, flipping to a fresh page, and began to sketch the grove. The trunks, the roots, the strange luminous patterns threading through them, it all radiated quiet intelligence. Every so often, the leaves would shift without wind, as if reacting to her movement. She crouched near one of the roots. Its glow intensified, forming shapes like veins under skin. Within them, faint symbols appeared, etched like old script. She didn't recognize the language, but it felt purposeful, like the forest was writing something down. At the base of the nearest tree, she noticed something else, a faint engraving. Half buried under moss, Clara reigns. The name stopped her. She stared for a long moment, then looked back toward the seed. Its red light deepened, swirling faster. The hum grew stronger now, vibrating through the ground. The grove responded. The leaves trembled, roots coiled tighter, and the air seemed to shimmer like heat rising off stone. Marisol stood, backing away slightly. All right. I see you're still alive, whatever you are." The seed pulsed again, this time releasing a sound, like a heartbeat, low and deep. Then faintly she heard it. Clara's voice, soft but distinct, carried through the air. "If you find this place, tell them not to disturb it. It's awake now. It remembers." The light dimmed. Marisol stood in silence. For the first time in years, she felt something ancient pressing against her thoughts. Not words, but impressions. Roots stretching beneath the soil, water flowing through stone, time itself looping in slow circles. She carefully picked up the seed. It was heavier than it looked, warm enough to make her palms sweat. "I'll keep it safe," she whispered. A soft wind answered, stirring the grove. She wrapped the orb in her scarf, tucking it gently into her bag. As she turned to leave, she glanced back once more. The trees swayed together, their leaves whispering in a rhythm that matched the faint pulse coming from the seed. It wasn't goodbye. It was permission. As she drove away, the road behind her slowly vanished beneath new growth. Ferns, moss, vines reclaiming the tire tracks almost as fast as they appeared. By the time she reached the main road, there would be no sign a human had ever passed through. But deep in her bag, the seed pulsed on, each beat syncing with her own, faint but steady. And though she couldn't know it yet, every dream she'd have from that night forward would take her back to the grove, to the light beneath the earth, to Clara's voice, calling through the hum of living roots. The forest had chosen another listener, and its memory was just beginning to bloom again. The road back to the village was nearly unrecognizable. Marisol drove slowly, the jeep's tires crunching over gravel and roots that hadn't been there before. Each mile stretched longer than it should have, and though she'd traveled this route dozens of times, the trees now seemed taller, their branches reaching inward like a cathedral roof, closing over her path. The seed pulsed quietly in her bag. She could feel it through the fabric, each rhythm matching her heart's beat. For a while, she turned on the radio, hoping for distraction, but the static came alive with faint whispers, so she shut it off. The jungle had learned her frequency. By late afternoon, she reached the outskirts of Balondo. The small settlement looked unchanged, wooden shacks, tin roofs, smoke rising from cooking fires. But when she stepped out, every villager she passed turned toward her. Silent, an old woman approached, her hair white and thin as mist. "You came from the north," she said softly, eyes narrowing. "From the Rains Grove," Marisol stiffened. "I was surveying the area. The forest reclaimed it faster than I expected." The woman shook her head. "It was not the forest that took it back. It was the memory." She pressed something into Marisol's hand, a small, smooth stone etched with faint spirals. "Listen to it when the night is quiet," the woman murmured. "Then you'll understand what it wants." Marisol wanted to question her, but the woman had already turned away, vanishing into the slow-moving crowd. That night, in her rented room above the general store, Marisol couldn't sleep. The whispers of the jungle echoed in her dreams, the rhythm of the heart weaving through the distant hum of crickets. Finally, she rose, turned on the lamp, and drew the stone from her pocket. It felt warm, alive. She held it to her ear. At first, nothing, just the hollow echo of blood and breath. Then faintly a sound began to form, a heartbeat. Then voices layered within it. Samuel's voice, measured and tired. We built our lives trying to control what remembers us. Then Clara's, maybe we were meant to be remembered differently. Marisol froze. Clara? She whispered, the voice softened, distant but distinct. I thought it would be loneliness. But it's peace. It's listening, Marisol. Always listening. She lowered the stone, trembling. The seed in her bag pulsed faster now, as if responding to the sound. The two artifacts, the seed and the stone, were calling to each other. She spread out her field notes on the table. Every sketch of the grove, every mark of glowing roots and symbols, it all connected. The spiral pattern on the stone matched the markings she'd seen carved into the trees. A memory network, perhaps, woven through organic life. But there was something else, an unfinished loop, a missing link. At the bottom of one page, she'd scribbled earlier that day, "The jungle doesn't remember people. It remembers choices." Now, she began to understand. She pulled the seed from the bag. It glowed faintly red, its surface swirling like mist trapped in glass. When she brought the listening stone closer, both artifacts began to vibrate softly, a resonance building between them. The light in the seed deepened, brightening the entire room. Shadows danced across the walls, bending into shapes, faces, roots, whispers of forgotten lives. Marisol's reflection in the window shifted. For a brief, chilling moment, it wasn't her own face staring back. It was Clara's, then Samuel's, then the two blurred together into something neither wholly human nor wholly spirit. The seed's glow pulsed faster, almost frantic. Marisol spoke softly, her voice trembling. "You're not trapped, are you? You're alive in there." The air thickened. From the seed came a whisper, not sound, but understanding. We are what the forest remembers through us. The words weren't meant to frighten her. They carried peace. But peace could be dangerous too. It could make you stay. Marisol hesitated. She thought of the villagers, their quiet fear, the way they never ventured north. The grove didn't want harm. It wanted continuity. A new keeper. "No," she whispered. "I'm not ready for that." The seed's glow dimmed as though disappointed. The stone cooled in her hand. For the first time, the room fell silent again. Marisol placed both artifacts gently on the table. She covered them with her scarf and sat in the quiet until dawn. Outside, the first light of morning filtered through the window, touching the edges of her notes. She looked out toward the jungle, now barely visible beyond the horizon. Somewhere out there, beneath the soil and the roots, Clara's consciousness pulsed within the heart, woven into every living thing. The forest was thriving, vivid, restless, aware. Marisol sighed. "You deserve to be left in peace," she murmured. "But peace never lasts where humans can find it." She packed her bag carefully, tucking the seed and the stone into separate cloth wraps. Then she placed both inside a small wooden box, sealing it with her initials. She would take them far from here, somewhere remote, untouched, where the heart's rhythm couldn't reach her dreams. But as she locked the box, a faint heartbeat continued to echo in her chest. Steady and quiet, the forest had not let her go. Marisol drove until the jungle turned to plains. The road stretched on endlessly, a grey scar dividing waves of grass and wind. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Even now, hundreds of miles from Bolondo, she could feel the faint pulse through the box beside her. The glass seed wasn't dormant anymore. It was dreaming. By dusk, she reached the salt flats, a mirror of light stretching beyond sight. The air was sharp and still. She parked, stepped out, and carried the wooden box into the open. When she opened it, the seed's glow spilled over her hands, turning her skin translucent. Beneath that light, she saw her veins like roots, her pulse answering the artifacts. For a long moment, she just stood there, listening. The silence here was immense. No insects, no wind, no heartbeat but her own. For the first time since finding the seed, there was no whisper of Clara, no echo of Samuel, no hum from the forest. Then slowly, the glow brightened, flaring like a final breath. A faint shimmer rippled across the salt. Shapes began to form, tall silhouettes, vague but human. Memories drawn out of the seed, reaching across time and place. Marisol dropped to her knees. "What do you want from me?" The light pulsed once. The voices that followed weren't pleading. They were remembering. Samuel's voice, we tried to contain it. Clara's voice, we tried to understand it. A third, deeper tone. You must decide if it should continue. Marisol pressed her hands against the glowing salt. Images flashed beneath her palms, scenes from the grove, the cabin, the storm, all unfolding like roots in reverse. She saw the day the heart awoke for the first time. She saw Clara stepping into the grove, offering herself to its pulse. She saw the first spark of awareness ripple through the earth. It wasn't creation, it was preservation. The forest had never been a threat. It had only ever wanted to remember. Marisol's throat tightened. "And what happens if I stop it?" The voices quieted. The horizon darkened, as though the seed itself was thinking. Then came a single whisper, barely audible. "Then the world forgets what kindness looked like before fire." Tears welled in her eyes. She understood. The heart was not merely memory. It was empathy given form, binding every act of love, grief, and sacrifice that humans had left behind. If she buried it here, in the flats, the seed would fade. The memories would scatter like dust. The forest would sleep. Humanity would continue, but emptier, quieter, a little less capable of wonder. If she returned it to the jungle, the cycle would begin anew. The heart would grow again. Another would find it someday, drawn by curiosity, burdened by understanding. There was no perfect answer, only stewardship. She took the seed in both hands. It no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. The wind began to rise, slow at first, then harder, whipping her hair and clothes. The salt beneath her shimmered, glowing faintly like water under moonlight. The wind carried faint voices now, Clara's laughter, Samuel's weary sigh, the echoes of villagers singing in a forgotten dialect. It was as if the seed was showing her what remembrance could sound like if allowed to breathe. Marisol smiled through the tears. "Then you'll remember us all," she whispered. But gently this time, she walked to the center of the flat. The sky had turned indigo, the last sunlight dying behind the horizon. Kneeling, she pressed the glass seed into the salt. It sank easily, the glow bleeding into the earth like ink into parchment. The pulse slowed, dimmed, and finally merged with the land. The light spread outward, rippling across miles of cracked white salt until it faded completely. Then, silence again. No flash, no tremor, just peace. Marisol sat there until dawn. When sunlight finally broke over the flats, the spot where she had buried the seed shimmered faintly, as if something beneath it still breathed. She whispered a quiet goodbye, then rose and walked back toward the jeep. As she started the engine, she looked at her hands. The faintest trace of light pulsed beneath her skin, brief as a heartbeat, then gone. She smiled. "It's listening still." Years later, travelers passing through the salt plains would speak of a strange phenomenon. When the wind died and the heat shimmered low on the horizon, you could hear faint echoes, laughter, murmured conversation, a heartbeat that wasn't your own. They called it the listening ground. Scientists dismissed it as vibration carried through minerals. Locals said it was the earth remembering itself, and somewhere, deep within that mirrored expanse, a single glass seed continued to pulse, patient, eternal, keeping the world from forgetting what it once loved.